Welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. Well, we kind of have a mixed bag tonight. In the first hour, we're going to be speaking to Justin McLachlan about Treknologies, and I will save you all from singing like Star Trek theme song music. And in the second hour with Trisha Kelly about conscious parenting. But don't forget, Just Energy Radio can be heard every Thursday night here live on the Inception Radio Network. And it's brought to you by soulhealer.com, where you can find out about all of the products and services I offer, as well as from the Institute of Applied Energetics, where you can learn to become a medical intuitive counselor or energy medicine practitioner. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com. So if you happen to miss an episode of Just Energy Radio, there are a number of places where you can come check it out. One is you can go to the Just Energy Radio website. There are over 6 years of archives available there. While you're there, do sign up for the Just Energy Radio newsletter. That will keep you informed of all the excellent programming we have coming up. You can come to the Inception Radio website itself and go on my little page and click on the link. Or if you have the app, the smartphone app, you can access it through that. You can also check out our YouTube channel, Just Energy Radio on YouTube, and listen to about 2 years worth of archives there. And if you're there, please do subscribe to our channel so that we know that we just have more fans. Fans are good. I have a couple of events coming up that I want to remind you about. That one's already passed. On June 15th and 16th is the Alchemy event in Los Angeles, California. I will be speaking there on June 15th. You can either go to the event in person or you can actually stream the event all over your computer, and you can get information about both options at alchemyevent.com. Then if you're in the New York metropolitan area, I will be doing a book signing on June 21st and June 22nd. I'll be in New Paltz doing a presentation and a book signing, and then in Albany, New York, doing a presentation and a book signing. So if you're in those areas, please stop by, say hi, get a book, get it signed, and hang out. I did one the other day at a Barnes & Noble in Plano, Texas, and it was just so much fun. We sat, it was only supposed to be for like an hour or 2 hours, and we just sat around and talked. It was a really wonderful event. So again, New Paltz and Albany, New York. If you need additional details, what bookstores they're at, do go to any of my web pages, soulhealer.com, justenergyradio.com, or appliedenergeticsinstitute.com, and look on the upcoming events link and click on any of them, and it'll take you to more information, dates, times, all that good stuff. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about our first guest and get him on the air. Justin McLachlan is a writer in Washington, D.C. His work has appeared in Wired, Popular Science, San Diego City Beat, and voiceofsandiego.org, among others. And Okay, and his new book, Treknology, Star Trek Tech, 300 Years Ahead of the Future, is his first nonfiction book. He is also the author of the science fiction Station One series, Time Up, This Time Around, and the forthcoming Time and Again. He's also the creator of Sight, a web series now in production and based on his short story, Superhero. So please welcome to Just Energy Radio, the author of Treknology, Justin McLachlan. Hey, Justin, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I am great. I'm just, I do a lot of very serious shows, and I don't want to say that this show wasn't serious, but it's one that, is kind of endearing to my heart because we're going to get to talk about Star Trek.
Yay!
Yay! And I won't sing, even though it's like right there in my brain. But let's start here. Usually I ask people, to tell me a little bit about themselves, and I'm going to get to that. But let's kind of sort it out. So if you were going to pick which is your favorite Star Trek series, because they have had different ones, which would they be? So my order of preference, I'll share mine first. Okay. Obviously, original Star Trek. Sorry, Boyle. Then Voyager. Then Next Gen. I really liked Voyager.
Yeah.
All right, 7 of 9. She was so awesome. Deep Space Nine. And then the Enterprise series, not so much. Okay, your turn.
Well, I started watching and grew up with the Next Generation, so that's going to have to be, I think, my top choice. And then I would pick Voyager, close second, followed by Deep Space Nine, and then I think, it's hard. I think Enterprise. I didn't watch Enterprise until recently, actually, when I was writing the book. It kind of grew on me. And then I have to pick the original series just because it was the last one that I watched, and a little bit before my time, but it was endearing as well. I like the new movies, so I don't know if that counts for much for some people.
Well, see, the new series, you watch them and they're kind of campy now. You look at the big buttons and the big lights, and it's like, God, how tacky.
Yeah.
But they're still good. There's, some of the stories are really good if you kind of go past the, where we have passed them in technology,
Right, yeah. Yeah, there's some really good storytelling. I tried to count it out at one point. I think there's probably over 700 hours of Star Trek TV or movies in some form to watch. So there's some good stories across all of them, I think.
So have you seen the new movie?
Yes, I did. I saw it.
So good, bad. I haven't seen it yet. It's on my list.
I really actually I liked it. I liked the 2009 movie as well. There were some things that bothered me about it that I think bothered everyone about it. And I think I liked this one because I think it was a little more respectful of everything that came before it, if that makes sense. Where I think the first movie kind of went out of its way to set itself apart, where the new ones were different. I think this one was almost an homage to what came before it in a way that made it a little fresh. It's never going to be a replacement for all the other movies and things like that, but it was enjoyable.
Good. I know my mom hasn't seen the new one, but she did like the first one.
Yeah.
So, and she's hardcore, early Star Trek. So if she gives it a thumbs up, it's got to be good. It's my mom.
Yeah. Can't argue with mom.
Can't argue with mom. Well, what gave it a plus for her is that Spock was the guy from Heroes, Siler from Heroes, and she really liked that character.
Well, that's good.
In a evil kind of way.
Yeah, I was going to say, he was a bad guy.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got interested in the whole Star Trek superhero thing.
Yeah, well, I'm a journalist by training, I guess. I went to school for journalism. I got a master's degree in journalism. Have been a freelance journalist for quite a number of years now. It just means that I write for whoever will pay for me, and Star Trek. I started watching Star Trek when I was probably, I want to say, third or fourth grade, maybe. My parents gave me a television for my bedroom, and they didn't give me cable, and so it got one channel, and every night that one channel played Star Trek: The Next Generation at 7 o'clock. So that's what I watched, and I think since then I've kind of really latched on to genre TV and genre TV shows. So when the 2009 movie came out, I was doing some work for a website called the San Diego News Network. That's where I used to live, was San Diego, and that website's long gone now, but I was writing about technology and science, and so kind of an obvious thing for us to write about at that point was some of Star Trek's technology that has made its way into our world at the present. And so I just kind of took that idea from that article and expanded it into this book.
Cool. Well, when we think of Star Trek, we think of starships and tricorders and communicators and my personal favorite, which we're going to come back to, transporters.
Yeah.
I on this show, I'm always like, they'll talk about some technology. It's like I am holding out for a transporter.
Right.
But in the realm of technology, where are we today? I mean, how close are we getting to that perceived vision that Gene Roddenberry put out there?
Yeah, I think we're probably a lot closer than people realize or think. In terms of computer science, we've pretty much outpaced what they imagined, and we're diverging in directions that they never envisioned. The internet was not something that Star Trek really thought about. It wasn't in the national consciousness then, and it might be that the internet is something that wouldn't work across light years as well as it does here on Earth. But I think computer science wise, we're definitely we've outpaced them, and we'll continue to outpace them. It's interesting. The humans in Star Trek had warp drive about, what year is this? They had it about 50 or 60 years from now on our timeline, and we have just started experimenting with warp fields and looking at that technology closer as a possibility for us. So, there are a lot of things that I think we're just kind of almost right on their timeline. It's almost scary how close we are on their timeline. So. And then there are the smaller things that I think everyone thinks about, like cell phones, and the iPad is very similar to the pad that they carried around.
Oh, I always think about that. When I tune into a Next Generation show and they're walking, or I think of Wesley Crusher with his little homework pad.
Yeah,
and I'm like, hey, I have one of those.
Yeah, it's so similar in design and concept, but again, if you think about it, they carried around multiple ones. If Dr. Crusher had a script on one, or in a duty roster, she had it on two different pads, and that's kind of, what I was getting about, where our devices are kind of decentralizing, where we're putting all the information out there and accessing them by radio signals. That was not something they really did a lot. In fact, I just watched the episode The Best of Both Worlds. Are you familiar with that from The Next Generation? It's the one with the Borg, where they kidnapped Captain Picard.
Of course.
Oh, yeah. It came out.
Yeah,
it came out actually in the theater when they re-released the Blu-ray edition. So I went and I saw it, and I was thinking about them. They're talking about the Borg and how it's so remarkable. They're connected and they communicate via these interactive signals. And I was like, we kind of do that too, except ours are called wireless routers that communicate across interactive signals. So I think when you talk about Star Trek's technology and you look at what we have now, you kind of have to look at it as kind of a fuzzy watercolor, kind of, when you make the comparisons. Does that make sense?
It does, but I don't want to be connected to the hive mind. Okay, so cancel that idea.
Right.
But if you think in the area of health, hopefully not. But if you think in the area of health, where you have like prosthetic joints, artificial joints and stuff, those are really coming forward. And I've seen on TV where they are working on like hands that can manipulate based on like thought waves or muscle things that would kind of make you Borg-like.
Yeah, it's a possibility. at least what we're doing is has a good ending, in terms of prosthetics for people who've lost limbs and things like that too. But on the medical front, I've just, I talked about one startup in Treknology, but I also I found another one on Indiegogo doing things really similar to a medical tricorder. There's always a race to build this miraculous little scanning device, and I think we're just really, really close with what I think the smartphone has really made that possible. And there are just some startups out there that are just coming into their own right now that where those things are happening. One is really, it's just a thermometer, but it uses the data from, say, if your kid is sick in your home and you take their temperature, it kind of crowdsources that data to let other parents know, there might be a breakout of the flu at your child's school, or help parents analyze, or analyze what's happening with their kids and in their neighborhoods and things like that.
But even if you think, like an MRI, I have to sit there, MRI, CAT scan. I don't know,
Right.
where you go through the big tube thing
Yeah.
and they take all the little pictures. If you think of computers back in the 50s, they were huge.
Right.
To the point that the power that they have now, you can get on, the cheap $5 calculator, or on a pen.
Yeah.
I've seen those. So it might just be a matter of time before they can take the technology that's in that massive machine and miniaturize it into something really small.
Right. I mean, computers get smaller over time, right? That's kind of what they do. So I think it is just a matter of time before we shrink everything down. And everyone's kind of familiar with the those controversial scanners at airports that we sometimes have to go through. They use something called T-rays, and I think I mentioned this in Treknology as well. Some scientists have figured out a way to shrink T-ray devices down to the handheld size, and T-rays are already being used in medical applications. So it really is just how long is it going to take us to get there? Not if we're going to get there, but just how quickly we can do it.
Yeah, because it does seem like our advances in technology, because Star Trek was 300 years in the future, 200 years?
Yeah, it's a variety of hundreds of years.
Okay, so if we go with
right.
like regular, Captain Kirk Star Trek.
Yeah, probably
how
about
far?
I think we're talking about between 200 and 250. I picked the number 300 because it was kind of an average of everything that we saw. But yeah, they were a little bit earlier, so about 200, 250 years.
And with how things are moving forward technology-wise, I think we're going to be much more advanced, in that same amount of time than they portrayed on the show.
Right, definitely. If you just look at the number of things, if you look at touch screens, we saw touch screens on The Next Generation when it premiered, and they were so futuristic and so interesting. And can you imagine what our world would be like today without touchscreens? They're almost just kind of an afterthought now, right? They're so advanced, so user-friendly, we just don't even think about how many times a day we use a touchscreen. I go to the drugstore, to CVS on the corner, and I check myself out on a touchscreen now, so...
Well, but one of the things that I always thought was interesting on Star Trek, and you kind of talk about this in your book, is the whole voice interface, because they would talk to the computer on my phone. They have this wake up command. So mine is computer. I thought that was pretty funny. My husband thought it was hilarious. Anyway, after I had to explain it to him and show him the movie. Anyway, but they would talk to the computer and have it do analysis. But why would they? Why did they have touch screens and then voice stuff?
Yeah, it's probably, if you think about the voice activated or the voice capable apps that we have now, it might just be that some things are better done talking to a computer, some things are quicker with the interface. It's kind of like how we have a mouse and a keyboard, I guess. It might also just have been a narrative device. It was much more dramatic to talk to a computer than it was to type to watch someone's fingers fly over a screen or something like that. And I don't know. I mean, for us, maybe that will change. Maybe voice recognition will become so much more powerful that our input devices that we use now and are so familiar with might go away.
So what do you think about today's voice technology? I think it's kind of a joke. Do you think that that's going to get better?
It is going to get better. It's got a long ways to go, and I talk a lot about the challenges with that. It's a particular challenge in computer science to talk to a machine and have it talk back, because the traditional approach is to program it and just give it all kinds of rules and say, well, if they say this, then you say this. But if you think about just the English language alone, that's going to become impossible to maintain really quickly. So as we learn how to teach our machines and how to enable our machines to learn from us, we're getting better. And we were talking about the cloud a little earlier, how we are moving all of our data into these networks that we access via the internet. That's a source of data that we have never seen before, that computers can learn from and learn how to interact with us. So, I have Siri on my phone. I have an iPhone, and the conversation is actually in the book, but trying to get her to look up the word tricorder was proved impossible. She couldn't get it. So, though I did ask her to beam me up, and she had an interesting response when I said that. So,
see, I've kind of given up on that whole thing. I tried using it for just texting,
right?
And it would be like rah, 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 rah. And it would just or it would make up this weird stuff that wasn't even really a sentence.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. It's just.
When I use it when I'm running, and I think of something that I need to send a text message, so I can just press the little button on my headphones and it works. Okay. There's still a lot of bugs to work out, obviously. They're not as smart as they need to be to carry on an intelligent conversation.
Do you think with the technology we have now, it's more a matter of training your phone? I hate that idea. Yeah, it's like, it's my pet rock.
Well, basically, that's what it is. I think it's a matter of us coming up with better training techniques, and we're learning how to do that. And it's basically the idea of developing, if it's akin to raising a child. You start with a child computer and let it grow up to be an adult, and it actually learns very well. If you try to force adult tasks onto a computer, or more intelligent tasks, I guess I should say, onto a computer, instead of letting it learn on its own, it's really hard. I use an example in the book about robots at MIT that they were teaching to walk. So if they gave the robots basic ability to learn and let them run around the room and bump into things and fail, the computers or the robots learn to walk much quicker than trying to program every little piece of information they needed to know how to walk into them. So it's just a matter of technique and honing our technique and how we teach our machines. We don't know a lot about intelligence at this point in our existence. We don't really know what makes humans smart, for example, and different animals not as smart. We're figuring it out, but it's going to take a while.
And kind of talking about artificial intelligence, it doesn't seem long before we'll have robots, robot technology commercially available. It seems like they're getting really close for them doing some stuff. On Star Trek, they had, the computer on board that sent. But the computer wasn't sentient, while Data was fully sentient, and then sitting here going through your book and going, okay, but what about like all the issues that they had in iRobot?
Right, exactly. Science fiction's been warning us about that for how long now? The rise of the machines. It's a really good question, because if you think about it, a machine doesn't necessarily have to be super intelligent to pose a threat. I think one of the scientists I quoted said something to the effect of anything with the self-awareness of a chimpanzee could potentially be dangerous. So that is definitely a question that we have to grapple with. And if you think about Star Trek, we had Data, who was this really, really good guy, I guess, if you will. But Data also had a brother named Lore. And Lore was not a good guy at all, and we didn't really ever get an explanation for what made them so different. Why was Data so good and why was Lore so bad?
He had abandonment issues.
It must have been, right? Because Data got all the advantages. I mean, it's kind of similar to what we talk about with real life siblings, human siblings, and how they're raised and how it affects them. But
But didn't Lore have the feeling chip? So he actually had feelings where Data never had that.
He did. And what's interesting is that scientists think now that if we want to build truly thinking machines capable of decision making, the emotions are almost going to be a prerequisite for that. Because in humans make decisions emotionally. And there have been studies with people who have been in accidents and the parts of their brain that experience emotion have been damaged. And they find it very difficult to make decisions. Picking out something as simple as a cereal in a cereal aisle at the grocery store becomes impossible without emotion to guide their choice. So we're not sure that the way it played out in Star Trek, that there could be a sentient, self-aware, artificially intelligent artificial life form like Data could actually exist without emotion. Maybe they could, but we're leaning kind of the other way.
He didn't eat, and he just wore a uniform, so it wasn't like he really needed to change his clothes and figure out what he was going to wear today.
Right. It's kind of counterintuitive, isn't it? We've been taught that emotion is the thing that's really, really difficult to, and I think we've been partially taught that by Star Trek, but in humans, it works the other way. So maybe our machines will have to be different from humans in that respect. Mm-hmm. It's a question to be answered. Not one I have the answer to, certainly, but much smarter people than me are working on it.
Well, I mean, do you think there's any research going on into just that question? I know that like in iRobot, even though there's been a lot of movies and shows that have talked about a computer taking over. We were watching, oh God, what was it? Terminator, Rise of the Machines or whatever, and it was the Skynet. They activated and it became sentient and it started launching off all the nukes. So that seems to be a reoccurring theme in stories. And I know in iRobot, Osmanoff came out with the 3 rules of being a robot.
Laws of robotics,
But has there been any are there any groups or anything like that kind of are looking that far in the future to keep up with what's going on technologically speaking?
Not to my knowledge. I mean, maybe somebody listening on there could point me to something like that, because that would be very interesting to me. We are not very good at asking those kinds of questions. And one of the things that I spend a lot of time on in Treknology is trying to slow down and ask those questions. If you remember in Jurassic Park, the character that Jeff Goldblum plays, his name escapes me right now, but he said basically, your scientists were so concerned with whether or not they could do it, they never slowed down enough to ask, should we do it? And I think it's a really important question, and it goes beyond just the threat that artificial life forms could pose to us because we gave them intelligence and decision-making ability. We don't have a great track record as a species of treating each other very well. It wasn't very long ago in this country that we thought we could own people based on the color of their skin. How are we going to treat a race of life forms that we actually created and have a much stronger ownership claim to? And I think that's an important question too.
Well, it's interesting because I was just thinking of 2001: A Space Odyssey, and Hal goes crazy in essence because he gets conflicting programming. Right. And, it came from, these kind of money-grubbing politicians that decided they were going to secretly insert their agenda into what was going on. One of the things that we know from Star Trek is that they got rid of money, which kind of got rid of, all right, in their show, a lot of that level of competition that goes on. Do you think that that's something that might ever happen here on Earth?
I spent a whole chapter talking about money because that was so interesting to me. And I went and I talked to a guy who wrote a book called The End of Money, David Wolman, and he spent a year without any cash. He relied totally on credit cards and wrote a book about that. And I told him that, and he said, "Well, how did they trade? What did they do?" And well, the answer was, they kind of didn't trade. They had all their needs provided for, and their goal shifted from amassing capital and wealth to bettering themselves. Now, he told me, and this is probably something that we could agree on, is that trading is kind of hardwired into our DNA, and I think money enables trade. So I don't think necessarily that money is a bad piece of technology. It is technology. I think it's what we tend to do with it that has caused problems for us as a species, as a society. And whether or not we will ever get to the point where we are moneyless, it's very hard for me to say yes at this point. In the near future, in our lifetimes, I think the power that comes with money is just too entrenched. But he also, David Wolman again, also said, we don't have to go very far back in our future to a time when human society was sort of moneyless. It was when we relied on kind of a more feudal system where we had people who could tell us, what we got and what we didn't get, and it didn't really work out well for us. So he, being much more of an expert in money than me, would say no. But again, we see it in Star Trek, and I think you're right. I think it led to a lot of the really cool things about Star Trek, a lot of the things that make us admire Star Trek so much, and that we evolved to a point where we're a better species than we are today. And I think looking at money might be a good way to figure out how to get there. And there are some groups doing some good things with money right now. I talk about this in the book. Technology is enabling all kinds of innovation and change in this field, and I think it's just going to continue.
Well, I mean, by getting rid of money to a certain extent, or it's like you get rid of the power base, or and I think, it's kind of like our dependence on oil. I think it would be quite the fight.
Right. Oh, yeah. I mean, you level the playing field. And I think, look at it this way. Money and power kind of go hand in hand. And when you have the power, are you going to let the thing that gives you that power go away so easily? And if you have all the power, you're kind of on the scale's kind of tipped in your direction toward that fight. But I mean, if you look at what's happened in our economy recently, we talk about technology and technology evolving, but it's kind of what happened, right? I mean, the banks needed more people in mortgages, and investors wanted more products to invest in. So we invented CDOs and all these exotic securities. I mean, if you want to talk about new technology, they were new technology we'd never seen before, and they failed us kind of dramatically. So we are in such a state of flux with money. I mean, you look at PayPal. PayPal opened its code base to developers recently. Startups. Have you heard of Square? It's a money startup. Yeah, I mean, more and more businesses I go to here in DC, I'm paying via Square. They have these Square readers. We're just entering this period of innovation with money, and that's good and bad. Bitcoin's been in the news a lot recently. It's been around for actually a while, but it seems the mainstream has just discovered it. People in the Euros.
And tell the audience, I just barely heard of it the other day and don't really know much about what it is. So if you know what that is, sure. I'd love to hear about it.
Sure. So Bitcoin is basic. It's an electronic currency, and it's decentralized. So no one owns Bitcoin, and no one has control over it, and it trades online through these exchanges that people set up. It's all open source, so theoretically anyone could set up an exchange to trade Bitcoin. It does trade against the dollar, so it's not a completely new kind of currency. And I think its biggest selling point for a lot of people is that there's no sovereign entity as of yet involved in Bitcoin. So, dollars in the United States are backed by the United States government, and it's pretty much the same country after country. They back their currency. So Bitcoin is completely separated from sovereign control at all. And it's becoming very popular with investors, especially, investors talk about safe stores of value. They want to have places to put their money that are safe. And you used to talk about that as like US treasuries and bonds and things like that. And now they're talking about Bitcoin. Investors in the Eurozone are particularly interested in moving their money into Bitcoin. And I don't know that it's ever going to catch on mainstream. And I think it's ridden some of its peaks already and is probably on the downward momentum of where it was, but it's definitely an example of what technology has enabled us to do in terms of money. We can create new kinds of money now. And again, going back to the financial crisis, I think people are just kind of hungry to see sovereign control, government interference kind of out of money, because they don't necessarily think the government protected their interests very well.
I mean, even though, we put our money in the bank and it's kind of invisible money, it just seems weird to like have internet money.
Right.
Because it just seems even less real than the not particularly real money that we already have.
Yeah, and it really is. It's just ones and zeros in a computer somewhere. And I mean, you can, like I said, it does trade against the dollar, so you measure its value based on how many dollars you can get for it. So that's how you take it out. But again, your bank account is generally electronic money as well. I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't carry a lot of cash with me anymore. I use debit cards and credit cards mostly, so.
Well, I don't think there are that many people that run around with a lot of cash. I mean, I think there are a few, but not very many. And I know that there's really been a push to pretty much eliminate cash.
Yeah. So, cash is expensive. Cash is expensive to maintain. It's vulnerable to counterfeiting. But again, we were talking about how Star Trek got rid of money. I mean, maybe this is a step toward us eventually doing that. I still think money is going to be around for a very, very long time for us. But we're definitely seeing some innovation
So that's the one that might take like 200 years to happen.
Yeah, if that. It's very, even in Star Trek, we did see there many, many races outside of the United Federation of Planets still dealt in cash. And I think on Deep Space Nine, we saw in particular, because they dealt with a lot of non-Federation races like the Ferengi and places like that bringing up the Ferengi, it's very interesting. In Star Trek, they're kind of us now, right? Because they were capitalists. They were very concerned with money. I know, exactly. Right? Yeah. But it's such an apt comparison, and I think Quark even says, he's the Ferengi bartender on Deep Space Nine. He says, you don't like us because we remind you of everything that you used to be. So, yeah, big question there. I don't know when or if that will happen. It's not gonna be in our lifetimes, and I would wager a few Bitcoin on that, but.
In your research on Star Trek, did you ever discover what caused the Earth or whatever to make that transition? Was that how the Federation was, and so we just got on that boat? Or did something happen on the Earth that made us decide to move in that direction? Any thoughts?
Towards getting rid of money?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what happens in our history in Star Trek is around, and I'm going to get this date completely wrong, and I'm going to get emails about this, but it was in the 2065, 2070, something like that. There was a Third World War, which left very, very few governments on Earth intact. So I think that was a big push at rewriting the way, because again, money is basically controlled by governments, and I think that was kind of a tipping point that enabled the species to rewrite a lot of the rules. And I think what really gave us a huge push was, right after that World War, we had our first warp flight in the solar system, which attracted the attention of the Vulcans, and Vulcans made first contact. And we were told that when that happened, when humans realized that they weren't alone in the world, it united humanity. And I think it was those kinds of things that eventually led us to realize we had grown beyond, maybe not grown beyond the need for money, but grown beyond the need to acquire wealth, or for that to be a driving concern for us. That's how they would explain it, I think.
Okay, so you've heard it here first. December 21st, 2065. The end of the world as we know it. Just saying.
Yeah. Well, we actually already should have been through the eugenics wars on Star Trek's timeline, and that thankfully did not happen. That was what created Khan, basically, and that would have been in the 90s. So we've diverged in one big way so far. Hopefully we'll diverge in some of the other bad things that happened as well.
Well, let's hope. I mean, I just want the good stuff. I mean, do you find that it's like I'm on two different shows and it's like, no, not, not yet. Not yet. Do you think that some of the technology that we have today was kind of based on or modeled after what people saw on Star Trek? Or do you think it had its own evolution and it just ended up that way?
Right. It's kind of the does art imitate life or does life imitate art question. I think the cell phone, I mean, I can't say for sure, but I mean, our flip phone, they're so similar. It's hard to say that Star Trek's communicator didn't influence our cell phones. And the same goes with touchscreens. I think Star Trek deserves a lot of credit for our touchscreens. And I mean, people are racing to build these medical scanning devices I told you about. I mean, they call it the medical tricorder. So it's, what else do you say other than, yes, Star Trek had a really huge influence on that technology. Warp drive, we're trying to build warp drive, and it directly is a direct reference to Star Trek. So,
well, and I think there are words that have come into the scientific physics vernacular that came directly out of Star Trek. Also, like time-space continuum.
Yeah.
I mean, I heard that on Star Trek long before I heard that, with people talking about physics and stuff like that.
Right, and it's difficult to know for sure because I think they did such a good job of basing their science in what was theoretically possible, if not probable for the time or our time. I mean, I know one of the books I relied on heavily was the Star Trek The Next Generation Technical Manual, which is a book that I got when I was very little, and I went and I found another copy on Amazon. And, they said specifically, we tried to make it hard to compare our computers with modern-day computers, but other stuff, they really did their homework and their research. So it's really easy to say, warp drive. We saw that in Star Trek. It's really easy to say transporter. I mean, if we ever build this thing, who is going to say that Star Trek didn't have everything to do with the transporter?
Well, then let's turn that around. Do you think, whoever wrote the manual or the creators of Star Trek, I mean, do you think that they had scientific insights? I'm just trying to think of, oh God, what's his name? I can see his face. Anyway, I think, but some of these science fiction writers, have put out stuff, actually in multiple occasions, like the guy who wrote the book about, I think it was Jules Verne, Trip to Mars or Trip to the Moon. And, he was talking about like the angle of declination and you have to go in at this angle and this and this. And when they actually were running the numbers, he was like 5 degrees off. I mean, he was very close. And so in looking at that technical manual, are you finding that these lay people, I mean, I don't know if they had scientists working on the staff putting it together, but these lay people just kind of like making stuff up actually were coming pretty close to what the reality is?
I think so. I mean, just going back to warp drive again, because that's such an interesting example to me. In this book that I was talking about, they called it, its official technical name is continuum propulsion or continuum distortion propulsion. And what our scientists are looking at now of ways to make the warp drive possible is that that's exactly how it works, by distorting the space-time continuum. So yeah, I mean, it's really impressive sometimes when you look at their explanations and what they were doing. I don't know how much of that was a science background or if they had science consultants, but I mean, at the very least, they did their research and they did their homework. And I think it's the difference between what we would call science fiction and maybe something more in the along the lines of science fantasy, if that distinction makes sense.
Well, I think so. I mean, I think the series always comes off as being believable. Like, hey, well, what about that?
Right.
Okay. So I'm going to change topics here real quick and talk about the thing I have been waiting for, and that's a transporter. You know, people are like, oh, well, then we'll have like warp drive and, you know, these little ships. You know, I always think of the Jetson, my little Jetson mobile flying over to work in my little spaceship thing. It's like, screw that. I want to transport.
Yeah, much more efficient means of travel. Well, I think I would have to say in our lifetime, we're probably not going to see this device. Oh. That's not to say that it's not possible. Again, going back to their science.
You're hurting me.
Well, there are some particular challenges that we have to overcome. I mean, we have known for more than 100 years now that the basic theory is correct. Matter and energy are interchangeable. We're just not really good at controlling that interchange, that process. Our best attempts, you know, destroy cities. We're talking about, you know, atomic weapons and things like that. So we have to figure out how to get that change under control. If your listeners are familiar with Star Trek, they may have heard of Dr. Lawrence Krauss. He wrote a book called The Physics of Star Trek. And one of the things he talked about was the data challenge with a transporter, because to transport somebody, you basically have to scan them and record information about their molecules and their atoms. Well, that's a huge amount of data. And at this point, we don't have computers or hard drives capable of processing that data or even storing it for that matter. We will very soon. I think the computer science challenge in terms of the transporter is probably the easiest to overcome, but some others not so much. We may get there, but you know, a bigger question is, what happens when we put a human being into a transporter? I mean, science is not really great at asking these big questions about life and about the soul, or whatever you believe, or whatever you want to call it, whatever makes us alive and human. We don't necessarily know that if we step onto a transporter, which, by the way, takes you apart atom by atom and converts you into energy, we don't know that uniqueness about us would go with it. And it's probably not something that we will know until the first human ever steps on the transporter, which, again, I think is going to be a really long time from now, unfortunately. But
right. All right, you're killing me here. Break my dream, you know.
Yeah. I could be wrong. Here's hoping that I'm
well, you know,
wrong.
But it would get rid of like pollution and stuff, because we could all have like little transporters, transport to work, that kind of thing. I mean, you have to have like site to site transportation, you know.
Right.
But even, you know, like on Stargate, you know, jumping series here a second, you know, they had the Stargate, and they could go to other worlds, you know, via wormholes. And I would think, okay, I mean, it's not the exact same technology, you know, and it's not really not a technology because you'd be going by a wormhole, but you'd still be kind of deconstructed or stretched out or whatever a wormhole actually technically does to you, and then kind of put back together on the other side.
Yeah, and you know, and that's a good point. There may be another way to achieve a similar result through through a different technique or a different concept. Scientists are working now on something called quantum transporters, which are really good for transporting information. They are fundamentally different from the transporters we saw in Star Trek, but say you want to download a movie from iTunes. It takes a while, right? 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes, depending on how long your connection is. Quantum teleportation or transportation could make that instantaneous. Whether or not humans could ever be transported that way is a really big open question, but there might be more than one way to get us there. Safer, easier ways to get us there.
Okay, now I'm feeling a little better. I can still hope. I can still hope.
Still hope, definitely hope. That was, in Treknology, the thing I said starting out was I am never going to say anything is impossible because I don't believe that. But I won't hesitate to point out the challenges because there are quite a few.
So, of the different technologies that have been presented in Star Trek, I'm just going to ask some like really silly questions. So sure. Which piece is your favorite? So obviously, like I'm totally waiting for a transporter.
Right.
But for you, what would you be waiting for?
I'm really excited about the holodeck, but I think it's another one that's going to be a ways off, at least the way we saw it in Star Trek. Yeah, that's the one I'm waiting for. Probably not the most obvious one, but.
Well, I just have a nasty mind, and I'm like, okay.
Yeah. Go in all kinds of directions with that.
In all kinds of directions. I mean, one of the things that I could never figure out about the holodeck is they're in this room, and then they're like riding a horse and doing all of these things, but they never crash into a wall.
Yeah, it's force
And I
fields.
never could like wrap my mind around that.
Yeah, they use force fields to hold you in place. So the images scroll while you think you're moving, and the force field holds you so that you don't ever actually move.
So is it kind of like one of those pools, those wave pools that you just kind of swim and you don't go anywhere?
It's like you're on a treadmill, basically, but you're locked in place. Which, we don't have force fields, and there's not really any tech on the horizon that would create force fields. So that's why I think the holodeck is probably a ways off. Let me put it this way. We had transporters in Star Trek before we had holodecks. So you might get your wish before I get mine.
But it seems like the technology, or at least part of the technology for holodecks is already being developed.
Yeah,
so it seems right now we're at least steps closer in that area.
Right. We have virtual reality simulators where you wear a suit or you wear glasses and they fill your frame of vision. We can create holograms. We can even project holograms into the air. We have techniques that do that. We just can't touch them. And the same goes with virtual reality simulators. We can sometimes simulate it, but it's nothing like what we saw on the show. So, because on the show, the holograms were surrounded by force fields as well, and that's what made them touchable.
So you could interact with them, or dance with them, or hold the glass, or whatever it was.
Yep.
And be shot and killed if the safeties were off.
Right.
And then break to a commercial.
Yeah.
We're kind of talking about all these technologies. So where do you think we're going from here? What next Star Trek item do you think we're going to start seeing available for us to purchase?
Well, I already think the tricorder is here in a rudimentary fashion. I think our smartphones can do. I think in a couple of years we're going to be asking what a tricorder could do that our smartphones can't do now. And like I said, the medical tricorder, people are racing to build this thing. I think we're going to have those kinds of devices. We're just so focused on mobile now that our mobile technology is going to outpace what they had very, very quickly. We're moving into things that they didn't really think about a lot in terms of wearable technologies, watches and glasses. In later shows, they wore their communicators on their uniforms, but that was about as much as it got. Like I said, we are working on warp drive. It's going to be decades, if that, but it's coming. I don't know how soon you're going to be able to buy a warp-powered ship at, like the local Toyota dealer or whatever, but it is definitely on its way. Talking devices, this is going to be within our lifetimes. One of the guys that I that I talked to, a computer engineer working on voice recognition, he's talking about voice activation in cars and refrigerators and microwaves. He doesn't want it to just be the smartphone. He wants all our devices talking to us.
Well, I'm just thinking of the communicator, the little insignia, or even the one that Captain Kirk had, his little flip communicator.
Yeah.
But, we've been kind of spoiled because our smartphones have internet access.
Right. Yeah.
And if you have that little badge on there, no internet. I mean, you can't watch YouTube or go on Facebook or any of those really important things.
Right. We have a tendency to integrate our tech, right? So we've taken their tricorder and their communicator and put them in one device. But it'll be interesting to see. We're hearing rumors Apple is developing a watch that will have some kind of connectivity. So that might be a step in changing our thinking about what we access on our internet-enabled devices. So maybe we'll have different devices where they are more singular purposed in mind, like they did.
But well, see, this is like so before your time. Dick Tracy had a watch, and he could talk to his boss by video phone on his watch. There was a picture. It wasn't just voice.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think back to when I was little, and the idea AT&T had a video phone that I think was something like 6 frames per second or something like that. And, now we have FaceTime and we have Skype and those kinds of things too. But yeah, I'm really interested to see what Apple does with this watch. It might be more, like you said, Dick Tracy than Star Trek, but it'll be interesting.
But it would be a step more advanced. I remember when they tried to come out with video phones and the people were like, there's no way I'm going to sit in front of my computer and talk to anybody. And I still won't video chat unless I have good hair. Sorry, just won't do it unless it's my mom. Then it kind of doesn't matter. But that's pretty much it. But it's turning around. And even, I mean, I have to tell you, I'll be honest with you and the listeners. It's like I don't trust the cloud. I will never, or minimize my cloud footprint forever. But my kids, they're like, oh yeah, you just put your music up there, you put this up there, and this, and there's just not any privacy concerns around it,
right?
And I think as as the technology comes out, you grow with it, and so probably for them, Skyping, just getting out of bed, with makeup everywhere and bad hair is probably okay. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think it's the technology you grow up with. I don't think you necessarily think about the privacy implications, but you're right. Those are other questions that I think we have to deal with, and we're just so bad at proactively thinking about those things. We always think about them after it becomes an issue. I mean, you talk about Congress. They're always running, how many decades behind trying to catch up with technology in terms of lawmaking and things like that. So we have a lot to think about.
Okay, so there's a question from Bob from the chat room, and the question is, do you see a growing movement of banning wearable recording devices in society and commercial establishments? And so all I can think is he's talking about like those Google glasses, but I don't know what else is out there.
Yeah, I think that's the first one that's out there. I've heard rumblings of people already doing that. It's just going to depend on how useful we find these technologies and finding the balance between what we as a society think is okay and what we think is not okay. And if, we haven't really seen what Google Glass can do yet. So we might think, that is so important that it's going to be more important to have access to this at all times than it is to ban it. I mean, for me, it's a little weird. I'm just not sure what it's good for yet, but I'll withhold judgment until I actually see it. But I don't know. If we do ban these things, it's going to come later than sooner.
Well, and I think his point being, you're walking around recording all this stuff. Now I'm inadvertently in your video shot.
Right.
And then you take it to the next step. Now Google has it. And what are they doing with it? And who has access to it? It's like, wait a minute, I'm just going to do something illegal and you're just going to have me record it.
Right. And if you think about it, it might just make us realize how much that's already happening without us knowing. The network of cameras. I live in Washington, D.C. I think there's a camera on every street corner now. So it might make us more aware. I think being more aware of privacy issues that the technology is bringing is a good thing, not a bad thing. So we just have to have a constructive dialogue about it. Doesn't necessarily slow down technology in the pace of development, but is conscientious, I think, is a good way.
Justin, I'm having so much fun with you, and I just looked at the time, and we need to go.
Yeah.
Because technology has caught up with us. So if somebody wants to get a copy of your book, Treknology, where's the best place to send them?
Amazon right now, any bookstore, if they don't have it, they can order it. Barnes & Noble, they have it as well. The publisher has it at boxfirepress.com as well, too.
Well, okay. Thank you so much. I had a lot of fun.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed yourself. Good. Yay. All right. Thank you. And I'm going to let you go.
Okay.
That's Justin McLachlan. His website is justinmcclellan.com. And we're going to be back with Tricia Kelly after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.